apologies for keeping you waiting. It's just, you see, I've been proctoring an examination down the hallway. Yes, even on a Sunday. The students are not very happy about it either. I was compelled to meet with the bursar and to collect the day's post, which arrives at my door every day here at University College. So much so that there's a Mount Everest stack upon my desk of letters and all sorts of things. Today's shipment included a parcel and a letter from a little American girl named Susan. She writes to tell me that she says she has just read my book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that she says she's so much in love with what she calls the lovely made-up bits. And she asks if I have ever, in my life, seen a magical wardrobe or met a talking lion named Aslan, which I suppose accounts for this. Yes, indeed, Susan, I could tell you I have seen these things. I find myself in a very unusual position. You, of course, have heard of my well-publicized conversion to Christianity. And I recall a lady at one of my talks who came up to me and she said, "And how, Professor, did this happen to you? Did a voice come out of the clouds? Did an angel show up and convince you? Did a voice come out of a burning bush?" No, not quite that. I get these questions asked me all the time, particularly in the letters I receive, and it's my duty to answer them. Although my brother, Major Lewis Warney, he serves as my secretary on occasion, and he suggests a stopgap to this problem. Warney says, why not prepare a card, a pre-printed card, which says, "Professor C.S. Lewis thanks you for writing, but he's got nothing at all to say in response to you." No, I mean, after all, if someone's nice enough to write to you, what's it cost to reply to them? A few pennies and stamps, nothing more. But those questions come all the time from people who are growing up, such as you and you and you, people who are growing down, I'll pick him, such as you. You know, it's a strange thing how it is when we are children, we always become aware of the magic and the enchantment. We always seem to be aware of how close the garden is, but as we find ourselves growing down, we lose the scent of the garden. We lose contact with the magic of things, how wonderful and special things can be. Another lady said to me once that, she said, "You know, Professor, when I was very young, I was certain I would grow up and I would be beautiful and I would be successful and I would be terribly happy and I would marry my Prince Charming. But then," she said, "something happened. The years passed and life had a way of getting in between the cracks. You know how it does. And she said as a consequence of this, she felt unloved by the one she felt ought to love her, and she felt she didn't love the one she felt that she ought to love." And wasn't that the way that many people felt about God and religion? That they lost touch with the magic of the whole thing. Now, when we're children, when we're very young, we are introduced to how special and magical and mystical religion is. And as we grow older, however, it tends to fade away. And why is that? Why do people become so nervous when they are hearing something that is religious? Or people next to them start talking about God, and they begin to get, "Oh, I wish they wouldn't talk about God." And worst of all, they hear the name Jesus, and someone says if they're not using it in vain, they must be terribly boring. How is it that those of us who are Christians, who may not always have been Christians, how do we get that way? Or if we once were, how do we get back to that place, to smelling the garden? It's a good question, I suppose. Finding our way to get back to the magic. But you have traveled far, some of you further than others, to hear this stodgy old professor talk about his views. Some of you would be much more interested if I just told you how I created The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't blame you. So, the best way to begin is at the beginning, I suppose. You know, the idea of someone's story always has a starting point, his or her biography. A gentleman I know named E.C. Bentley once said, you know, geography is about maps, and biography is about chaps. And ladies, of course. And so perhaps I ought to begin there. My story. I was born, no surprise, September 29th, 1898. I was christened Clive Staples Lewis. Quite a mouthful to many of you, I suppose, to wonder if you have simpler names than that. But I was always called Baby or Babsy growing up, and I took great exception to that, especially when I was a little fellow. And I was very bossy, I suppose you might say. I remember saying to my brother, who was 3 years older to me, I walked up to him when I was a little fellow and I said, Warnie, white nose. His nose was running, and he wiped it. Not much longer after that, I said to my parents, I was tired of being called Baby or Babsy. Who would want to go through their young life being called that? And so I said to them at one point, I am Jax, or Jaxie. From that time on, the only thing I would answer to was the name Jax, or Jack. As many of my friends, even to this day, refer to me as Jack Lewis. Well, I was born in Ireland, and some of the happiest, memorable times of my life were when I was a young fellow and we moved into a house that was called Little Lee. What a beautiful house it was. Big house, strangely proportioned. You see, I'm a creature of long corridors, empty sunlit rooms, unexplored attics, the sound of pipes and strange cisterns, the sound of wind coming beneath the tiles of the roof that could be ghosts. Who knows? Those sounds, and also the sounds of books. Now, some of you are saying, what kind of a sound would a book make? Well, if it's a good book, it might make many sounds. And when my brother and I, we had quite an imaginative life, we loved reading. The house was full of books. Everywhere in the house there were books. This is largely because of my parents, who loved books and raised us to enjoy them. My father, Albert Lewis, was a solicitor, what you would call in this country a lawyer. My mother, Flora Augusta Hamilton, was the daughter of a clergyman. She was a very brilliant young woman. She was a mathematician. She studied at Belfast University, mathematics. And we were raised by these two people, and they had their influence over us the way parents always do. I remember writing my little diary at the age of 6, and I said, I am like my parents, but I'm particularly like my pappy, because I have thick lips, and I have a stern manner, and I am frequently wearing a cardigan. Some habits never change. And in that house, even when my brother went away to school and I remained, we were never alone. My grandfather lived there, the two servants lived there, my mother and father lived there, and when Warnie was away, I was never alone because I had my books. And I had the friends who jumped out of my books. I mean, stories of Gulliver and the Lilliputians, Robinson Crusoe on his island, and of course, who could forget the redoubtable Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I enjoyed them all. And Warnie and I, when he was home, we would make up our own stories. We created a fantasy land full of animals dressed like people. We always loved that. There were certain authors when I was a child. One of them was named Edith Nesbit, and she used to write about animals who acted like people. And she used to write about ordinary children who had grand adventures, extraordinary adventures, just as you will have if you look for them. We called our country Boxen, Except Warnie became very sophisticated after a while. He decided to call his part of the country India. But we created characters such as Sir Peter Mouse, who was a great swordsman, and Sir Goose, a spy and a general, and all sorts of them. And so quite a grand time using our imagination. Sometimes Warnie and I would go upstairs, and there was a wardrobe. You know what a wardrobe is? Probably not. You call it a closet. This is going to be very confusing, and I'll explain in a moment. Because if you come over here to this country, and you tell people, I need to use the closet, they may think you mean the bathroom. We call them water closets. But the closets that we had to hang our clothes in when I was young were called wardrobes. And Warnie and I would often get into the wardrobe, and we would huddle down and tell one another stories. This is a seed that I will plant in your memory for a bit later. Well, I enjoyed those days until a critical period of time when I was 10 years of age. You see, my mother took ill. I was always used if I had a toothache or a headache or a nightmare. In the middle of the night, I would call out and my mother would come to me. But on this particular night, my mother did not come. And I remember sliding out of bed, and the feel of the cold floor on my bare feet, and I heard noises and voices out in the corridor, and I opened the door and I peered out, and I saw our nurse coming down the hallway, and she was crying. And I saw the doctor, and a very serious look on his face. And I saw my father, and he seemed to be shattered. Well, I was quite surprised, you see, because when I knew that my mother was sick, I prayed to God to heal her. And I knew that He would. He would answer my prayers. But, you see, my mother died. Cancer, they say. She died. I could not figure this out. How could she have died when I prayed to God to help her, to save her? But my mother died. And I was angry. I was so enraged at God. How could God, who could do everything as we were told, the great magician could do anything, why could He not have saved my mother? Simple enough. Wave your wand, God, and say, she'll be better. And her little boys will be happy. And her husband will be smiling. But my mother died. And I resolved that I would fix God. How? First off, I would no longer pray to Him. He would be sorry. And then I would cease to believe in Him. It's a bit of an opposite thing there, right? I mean, I'm going to cease to believe in somebody, and then I'm going to punish him by not praying to him. Everything was changed. From a glorious time, suddenly, we were cut adrift, Warnie and I. My father grew very quiet. Everything in our household changed. I remember about 2 days after her death, walking into her bedroom, and there was the bed made as if no one had ever lain in that bed. And next to the bed there was a small table, and upon the table was a calendar that they used to have long, long ago with quotations from literature. And the day she died, no one had changed it. It said, men must endure their going forth even in their coming hither. It was a quotation from Shakespeare's King Lear. My mother died. I did not understand. I did not understand. Not much longer after that, my brother and I were sent away to school. It was quite a horrible place. It was in England, number one. No longer was it green and beautiful as it was in Ireland the morning that Warnie and I wound up in Liverpool. Everything was gray and rainy and dismal, and then we found ourselves at this school. What I remember most about this school was bad food, bad plumbing, and the headmaster was quite mad. You chuckled, but he was actually certified to to be put into an insane asylum not much longer after I was there. I don't think there was a connection from my arrival. And then we were sent to another school, and it was an interesting place, but I had difficulty because I was the sort of fellow, even though I had a brother, I felt as if I was alone, as if I had been an only child, and because of that I was... Are any of you only children? No? Only children are peculiar because they learn to be on their own. And because of that, they find it difficult to join in. I found it difficult to join clubs and sporting teams and having to trounce down the field with all the other lads. I had no great interest in that, you see. I eventually learned the rules down the road that playing and participating these things was rather like going to the dentist or paying your tax to the government that was necessary to get along. We were taken to a Roman Catholic church many Sundays, and it was there for the first time that amid the smell of the incense and the candles and the Latin, I sensed the mystical nature of religion for the first time. It seemed to belong to God, but it was unusual, and I had never known it before. And I saw people practicing their faith and enjoying these things, and it was described to me by someone as holiness. And I only came to understand that later in certain things that I read, that there was a sense of God and godliness that was holy. And I wanted to know that. I wanted to touch that. I was hungry for something like that. But I had no desire to connect it to God, because remember, I was no longer part of his club. I had opted out. I would not pray to him every night when I went to bed. He would be sorry. Well, time passes, and over the course of time, when I wound up leaving these schools, I was to be prepared to enter university. And in those days, if your studies weren't enough, or you weren't considered smart enough, or they wanted you to get smarter, they put you in the hands of a tutor. Sometimes they called them crammers. And the person that my father had picked had been his favorite headmaster at school. His name was W.T. Kirkpatrick. My father called him the Great Knock. I had no idea why, or Kirk. And I was to be put into Kirk's hands to prepare me to go on to university. And so I was sent into the countryside to Surrey by train to meet him and to spend my time with him. And I recall the day I got off the train, I stepped down onto the platform, and there at the end of the platform was a rather tall gentleman with white mutton chop whiskers. He looked like a nose like an eagle, and he looked rather ferocious. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he walked toward me, and he said, "Are you Lewis?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Come with me." And as we walked out to the station, I decided I would make some conversation, and I said, "Well, it's quite a nice day." And he said, and I said, "You know, Surrey, it's not quite as wild as I had expected." "What?" He bellowed at me. He said, "Stop!" I stopped where I was. He said, "What do you mean, as you expected? What did you base your expectations on?" And I said, "Well, it's just the sort of thing I had heard. It was just my opinion." "Opinion? You have no opinion at all unless it is based upon logic and knowledge and personal experience and philosophy. Until you can offer up opinions based on those, you do not base your thoughts on anything." And I thought, this is going to be interesting. And so I spent a good deal of time with Kirk, who prepared me to enter university, which I did in due time. I took with me much of his learning. I also took with him his personal opinions, because you see, he and I were well suited. He was an atheist who had begun as an agnostic. And before that, he was training as a Presbyterian minister. Make of that what you will, considering where we are. He taught me that the new philosophy that people were talking about is that we were in charge. No one else was in the driving seat but I. What happened to me was as a consequence and the result of what I chose to do. I was in charge. Certainly not some phantom God in the sky with a great white beard who was saying, move this over here and move that over there and change that color and kill this man's mother. And no need for that. And so Kirk suited me mighty well.